The president has spent basically his entire public career criticizing foreign entanglements, nation building, sending American troops to fight abroad, particularly in the Middle East. This plan seems like it could ultimately involve all of those things. Can you explain this reversal and how building and owning Gaza squares with America First foreign policy?
I would reject the premise of your question that this forces the United States to be entangled in conflicts abroad. Let me just take a step back here, because this is an out-of-the-box idea. That's who President Trump is. That's why the American people elected him.
Indeed, the president's bombshell announcement yesterday seemed to catch Capitol Hill, along with foreign allies and foes, a little bit off guard.
He said in that press conference, everybody I've spoken to loves the idea of the United States owning that piece of land. Well, here are some of the words from the leaders across the region this morning. Unequivocal rejection, illegal, racist, non-negotiable, absurd.
Oh, is that just the typical press naysaying, or is there something deeper going on here? Joining me now, Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth, first time on the Ingraham angle as the Secretary of Defense. Mr. Secretary, congratulations. It is fabulous to have you on tonight. I saw you earlier with Prime Minister Netanyahu, and I know you said you didn't want to get ahead of the president on this, but this has caused quite a stir among our allies and among our adversaries. What can you tell us tonight to clear up some of the confusion about what the president floated?
Well, I think what Caroline said is right. There's a lot of assumptions being pushed upon what the president said. And what I said in front of Bibi Netanyahu, it's worth repeating right now, that ultimately all options are on the table because we're not going to lay out exactly what we would or would not do in this particular context. This is an outside-the-box thinker who understands, Laura, the definition of insanity, which is trying to do the same thing and hoping for a different result. And in Gaza, we've seen for decades, time and time again, this false belief that if we just try a different sort of Hamas, or maybe the Palestinian Authority, or maybe once they're cleared and then we allow them back in and we renegotiate again, that we'll get some sort of a different outcome. Bibi Netanyahu and the Israelis know that's not true. President Trump knows that's not true. And so he's willing to overturn the apple cart. As she said, think outside the box, recognize that you can, through these types of discussions, Laura, you can also move the Overton window of what's possible. The Israelis want to remove Hamas. This is what, Benjamin Netanyahu and others have said very clearly. Hamas needs to go. There's phases of the negotiations that the Israelis are undertaking, and we need to bring our Americans back as well. But once Israel is able to eradicate Hamas, that's not our job. Israel wants to do that, and they will do that. The status of Gaza after that is a conversation that President Trump is willing to have. What is its status? How is it actually guaranteed? And Laura, you and I have talked about this too in the past. I'm a veteran of the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. I recognize what entanglement in the last 2 decades has looked like. President Trump was one of the first people to call the Iraq War a dumb war. And that's not to impugn those that served there. I love the legacy of those that served there. But the recognition of the result is that we got entangled for decades, and what did America get out of it? So he knows that. He's led the charge on raising the alarm bells about that. That's not what Gaza is about. Gaza is about keeping all options open, recognizing the support of an ally, and thinking outside the box, and who knows what happens after that.
Do you know if the president checked with Jordan or any of our Middle East allies before the announcement yesterday? I mean, and again, I don't know if this reporting is accurate. I have no idea, Mr. Secretary. But the reports are that the chief of staff was taken aback by the announcement, that others in the room were surprised by the announcement, which is, it's not a negative or positive. But if a lot of people are taken by surprise, you can't be surprised that the reaction is, whoa.
Well, I wasn't surprised, Laura. I appreciate the robust conversations that go into how the president makes decisions. Nobody talks more to allies than President Trump. No one's done more for that region. No one's brought more peace through the Abraham Accords, through working with neighbors. He also recognizes the obvious. I mean, think about the indictments on Gaza from, say, the left for the longest time. It's an open-air prison, is what they say all the time, trapped by the Israelis. Well, what if we opened the door and allowed people to actually leave if they wanted to leave temporarily or for a longer term? He's simply asking the question that others won't ask. Okay, in the Sinai, Egypt, or in Jordan, would you be willing to entertain it? What would be the terms by which you would? I know he's had those conversations. I know he's willing to have them. He's also talked about other countries being willing to open their doors and recognize reality as far as helping to fund those types of things. So it's been a static conversation for far too long, which is why I think you saw Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu right next to him saying, this is a disruptor, outside-the-box thinker. We need new ideas in a place where it hasn't been disrupted for a long time. So there are people that would be caught off guard. That's something the president's willing to manage. But those of us that were there at the press conference, we're not surprised that he'd think differently, because that's what he got elected to do.
Could you envision U.S. boots on the ground to manage this takeover or rebuild? Would that be a possibility?
So, Laura, I think we're a very long way from that. And part of this conversation would be robust discussions that I would have as the Secretary of Defense with the President, with the National Security Advisor, with the Secretary of State, with our allies and partners. That's a long conversation. But ultimately, what I know in sitting with Prime Minister Netanyahu and the Israelis is they want to finish the job against Hamas. They want to finish the job against Hamas. They want to eradicate those responsible for what happened on October 7th. They want to clear that out. They want to get the hostages back. And as their ally, we want to support them in doing so. You bring peace by eradicating terrorists who seek the destruction of Israel. That's how you bring peace. And so I support that. What happens after that is a longer conversation. And hopefully in every case, and the president would acknowledge this, you don't want to have to use American boots at all if you don't have to. That's my preference, having been there, of course. That's your preference. But you don't pull away options when the president's looking to think outside the box.
Mr. Secretary, it was phenomenal news on the Army recruitment numbers. The president, brought it up today during the EO signing in the White House. It's phenomenal. It doesn't surprise me one bit. But now we're learning about the illegals being sent to Gitmo, and I know a lot of legal action against that is planned. You've spent time at Gitmo. You know it very well. I'm looking forward to going there with you because that is a brilliant idea to remove this problem from the United States. What do you expect the U.S. response will be, and will it be successful against these lawsuits about the movement of these illegals to Gitmo?
Well, let's do it, Laura. I welcome the opportunity to go there for you to see it firsthand. As you said, I spent a year there as a guard, guarding 600 or 700 al-Qaeda Taliban types. It's a phenomenal facility built for this, which is why from the beginning I said, it's the perfect place. You've got the hardened facility for Tren de Aragua, violent gang member types who need that kind of lockdown. And then you have on the other side of the island or of Guantanamo Bay Naval Station, a place built for migrants, for those who peacefully are going to be extricated out of the United States. We know there will be legal challenges. Here's what we know, what President Trump knows, is that border security and internal enforcement is national security because we were invaded for the last 4 years under Joe Biden. Tens of millions of people entered our country. We have no idea who they are. We're going to find those here illegally, prioritizing those with violent or sketchy pasts, and use Guantanamo Bay as a transit way to remove them and send them back to their home country. And I'll tell you this, Laura, I was down at the border on Monday, and you talked about the recruiting numbers. The morale of our military is sky high for two key reasons. It's incredible. First of all, it's the Donald Trump effect. It's the President Trump effect. They want to serve under a commander-in-chief they know will have their backs. That's number one. And number two, they're defending our homeland, Laura. I mean, we've spent 2 decades guarding other people's borders. And when you meet these men and women on our border in real time, able to defend their communities, their families, their churches, their school, they love that. They're motivated by that, and they know we will have their back. So this is part of a real solution to a real problem that the president promised the American people, and he's delivering. So will there be legal battles? That's what they always do. But we know we're standing on high ground. The military is capable and able to do this, and we're excited to be a part of it.
And Mr. Secretary, I know you're involved in the conversations about that horrific accident at Reagan National Airport. Black Hawk helicopter involved with that. Do we know anything more about why perhaps that Black Hawk was flying at an altitude that it shouldn't have been flying at? And of course, concerns among the public with the deep mourning for all of those lost about whether pilot error or tower error had anything to do with this. Do we know?
The investigation is ongoing, Laura. We have learned more because of black boxes and tower communications. It appears there was some sort of altitude issue. I don't want to get any further than that, out of respect to all the families involved, all those who deserve a fair and thorough investigation. I had a chance to talk to the three families of the soldiers that were lost. Obviously, they're devastated, absolutely devastated. We pray for them. We pray for all those on that airline. And we're taking steps along with Sean Duffy at Transportation and the FAA to ensure that that area around Reagan National is treated differently so that something like that does not happen again. Because flying in anywhere should be safe and just a second, not even a second thought. So we're doing both the FAA investigation, but also our own internal. And when we know, you will know. We want to be fully transparent about this.
All right, Mr. Secretary, great to have you on The Angle. Come back a lot. Look forward to hitting Gitmo with you. Thank you so much.